Welcome to Deep Transformation, Self-Society Spirit. I'm Roger Walsh, and our co-host is John Dupuy, author of the text Integral Recovery. And our guest today is Professor Mark Fischler. Mark has the distinction of being, other than Hamid Ali, who we're doing a year-long series with, of being our most frequent guest, the only person we've had on 4 times. And that's a tribute to Mark, who's a remarkable human being. And it's also a sad statement about our times that we really have sought his counsel as a legal scholar and expert on our contemporary situation for guidance and understanding in this very strange and in some ways many really tragic time we're facing. Mark is a professor of law and criminal justice at Plymouth State University. He's the recipient of the university's Outstanding Teacher Award. He's also co-host of the podcast Integral Justice Warrior, in which he explores justice and contemporary issues from an integral, that is, encompassing integrative perspective. And he's a dedicated contemplative practitioner. So, Mark, it's a privilege to have you back with us. And maybe since we are now a year into our current presidency, or over a year, perhaps we could start by asking you to give us your kind of big picture perspective or reflection on this year and this administration.
Yeah. Well, first off, honored to be with both of you. Thank you for the kind introduction. And it's you're both wonderful human beings with such wisdom. So it's a true honor to be back on your show, albeit in strange times. Good words, Roger. Yeah, to think back, right, or a little over a year ago, Donald Trump was reelected to the presidency and came in on January 20th and really went at things with a directionality and purpose really unseen in a very long time, certainly in my lifetime. And of course, with that, there comes some good and some bad. But I would have to say the overall trajectory of Donald Trump's presidency is a kind of a devolution from democracy towards an authoritarian approach to governance. I'm not saying that we're there, but there are a whole lot of signs that that's the directionality. And so that kind of devolution has been, I think, the center of gravity of the reality that we in the United States have to grapple with, understand, and deal with for those of us that cherish the principles of a democracy, because those principles of a democracy really not only reflect, shared governance, but it also there's a spiritual aspect to it in the sense that there's a recognition of the interconnection of beings and the interconnection of perspectives and the value of hearing those perspectives. And so, I'm concerned.
Uh, Mark, can I share something here? I just looked this up before we started, and it was ChatGPT, and I asked about the bullet point characteristics of fascism, and she, I use a pronoun for her, she, said this characteristics of Mussolini and Hitler. That was not applying it to the United States, but I'll just read through these quickly, or not so quickly. Core ideological features: ultranationalism, myth of a national rebirth, make America great again, scapegoating and enemy within, immigrants, Dems, liberals, militarism and glorification of violence, the Department of War, kill them all, authoritarian one-man rule, that is Donald's wet dream, I suppose, one party or dominant party state. They currently control, seems like the Supreme Court in both houses of Congress. Abolition of liberal democracy, elections, independent courts. They're working on that. Police state repression. Does that bring up any images? National Guard all over the streets, these ICE people that come in with the covered faces looking like a bunch of upgraded Gestapo agents. Social and cultural patterns, cult of tradition, reaction against modern liberal culture, anti-intellectualism. Let's take out Harvard. Rigid hierarchy, patriarchy, belief in natural social rankings by gender, race, class, glorification of masculinity, youth, discipline, and obedience. Mass rally politics. Have we seen that? A few. And state-directed capitalism is another one. Private property and big business remain, but unions are crushed, and the state directs the economy towards national goals. The alliance of elites and a mass movement. Like, why are the working class people supporting all these things for the ultra-rich, for the oligarchs in our country? Good trick. Exploitation of crisis and humiliation. The immigration crisis comes to mind. The use of legal means plus violence. He has been so incredibly vindictive with the legal means at his disposal, using the DOJ and the FBI just to go after people that committed the sin of opposing him, being political opponents.
Right.
And I think that's good stuff there. So if it's not fascism, it's darn close.
Yeah, well, to work off of what you said, the New York Times at the end of October ran a major editorial that was entitled, "Is Our Democracy in Decline?" And it then went through 12 aspects of what authoritarianism looks like. And you mentioned many of them, but let me go through them in a kind of meticulous way with some of the evidence that you actually touched on, so that we can kind of see where exactly we are with this, which I think ChatGPT did a great job with. So thank you for that, John. So,
And Mark, can I just ask, maybe just start with the elementary.
absolutely.
How would you define authoritarianism?
That's a great question. I think authoritarianism is when, kind of, I can define it in terms of what it isn't. It doesn't honor, it's more of like a dog eat dog, the best survive. It's quite feudal in its orientation. It doesn't want to honor different perspectives, and it's an approach that takes the spoils and certainly tries to dominate its perceived enemies. And those are some, I think, hallmark pieces of authoritarianism.
Yeah, and so please,
Yeah.
you
So
were going to give
with
us.
that, one piece from the, I'll go through all 12 and just mention some pieces that reflect sort of what John said. So one, authoritarianism stifles dissent in speech. So using the federal communications Federal Communications Commission to stifle Jimmy Kimmel, to pressure different TV stations to act in a certain way, revoking visas on college students who were outspoken on the issue of Gaza, um, you know, criticizing judges that rule against him, and then make them targets of their MAGA crowd. In fact, 11 federal judges and their families have been threatened. That's one. Two, an authoritarian persecutes political opponents. So, to John's point, he's secured indictments against James Comey and Letitia James those indictments have been dismissed because they hired the prosecutor who was hired went about their job in the wrong way. But he's ordered investigations of Adam Schiff, the senator, and he's gotten rid of employees in the FBI and the various prosecutors' office, attorney general's office, who were part of investigations on him. 3, an authoritarian bypasses legislatures. So they say when a democracy slides towards autocracy, the leader finds ways to neuter the legislature. We've seen that. He's basically, Congress has given themselves up with Republican rule to his authority. So he's bypassed Congress for tariffs, where tariffs are supposed to live from.
And ignoring court orders, I might add. It just
we're going to get to
doesn't
that.
do it. Oh, sorry. I'm jumping ahead
No,
here.
that's actually one of the hallmarks of an authoritarian. Authoritarians 4 uses military for domestic control. John, you mentioned this, using the National Guard in LA, and attempted the same in Chicago and Portland. He's fired high-ranking officials that have shown disagreements with him in the military. He summoned hundreds of military leaders to Virginia for political speech and rally. 5, an authoritarian defies the courts, to John's points. And he started to do those things. He ignored a federal judge's order to turn around planes that were deporting migrants to El Salvador. When he was blocked by by a judge for bringing in the Oregon National Guard to Portland, he went around that and deployed the National Guard from other states. 6, an authoritarian declares national emergencies on false pretenses. The whole thing with tariffs is based on this idea of a national emergency, and that's now before the Supreme Court. But historically, presidents aren't able to make tariffs on their own.
They can't levy taxes according to the Constitution, and tariffs
That's right.
are a tax.
7, an authoritarian vilifies marginalized groups. John, you mentioned this. He just did it the other day with Somalians. He's blamed immigrants for destroying communities, fired women and people of color for leadership positions, attempted to erase parts of Black history books that deal with slavery and segregation from military libraries. 8,
Wow.
an authoritarian controls information in the news media. We've seen he sought to manipulate government information. He fired the head of labor statistics, pushed Congress to end funding for public radio, forced, and obviously some of the force with the media, with the FCC that we talked about with Jimmy Kimmel and beyond. Number 9, an authoritarian tries to take over universities. John, you mentioned this. He's cut millions of dollars of research funding and tried to dictate the hiring and admissions policies at various universities, even was able to force the resignation of the president of the University of Virginia. An authoritarian, number 10, creates a cult of personality. He had that lavish military parade on his birthday, memes with crowns on his head, etc. Number 11, an authoritarian uses power for personal profit. He actually charges the Secret Service $1,200 a night to stay at his hotels while protecting him.
Jeez, I didn't know that. Oh dear.
Right?
It's really bad.
Amazon paid $40 million for the rights to Melania's documentary. Solicits favors from 4 governments like Qatar with the plane.
Yeah, $400 million airplane. that he
right?
gets to keep with him after he leaves and goes to his library. I mean,
All the
seriously?
pardons that he's all the pardons that he's done with crypto, people that went to jail that have promised to profit his cryptocurrency involvement. And then an authoritarian manipulates the law to stay in power. So we see, as Judge Michael Luttig wrote a piece in the Atlantic called "The President for Life," as he has threatened to try to stay in power beyond, and the lengths that he's gone to gerrymander various states so that he can maintain power, even if he loses an election, as J.D. Vance has already pledged to do what Mike Pence didn't do, which was to not accept the electors from the various states. So those are the 12 hallmarks, and those are some examples of where Donald Trump is pushing us in that direction. And I don't want to say that we're there, because we're not there. We have a strong press. We're seeing some pushback in various areas. We're seeing elections that are running smoothly and fairly. We just saw some, 10 Democrats win in November, close elections in Tennessee. Nobody's questioning those elections. States are still running as they are. We're even seeing some Republicans now pushing back at Peter Hegseth and some of the acts in international waters. They're holding some hearings. So, I do want to emphasize that as well. But, the evidence isn't good. And it's certainly unprecedented in our lifetimes to see this. And so,
Mark, I'm
yeah,
sorry. I was going to say on a positive note, Congress and Senate, the House, almost voted unanimously to release the Epstein files. And that was the first, I never thought they'd do it. That's the first time that Republicans really voted against something that he was very, very scared about or really wanted to happen. And my fear is, as more smoking guns, I mean, how many smoking guns do you need before you know there was a gun battle, right? It's just getting so thick. But I think he'll, because of his fear of that, he'll try to do things to distract from that overwhelming issue that comes up day after day, like going to war with Venezuela or some other crises, to just make it about something else besides him and his past crimes, associations, and sins. Just a
yeah.
thought.
I mean, I think that I do. I'm open to talking about the Epstein situation in a little bit, uh, because I think actually it's somewhat emblematic of our issues that we're facing and why we're devolving in many ways as we get caught up in conspiracy theories and our distrust of government. And so there's some issues there. There's some real issues there because Epstein is a part of these elite circles, and some of these elite folks did some really terrible things. But the kind of conspiracy, the QAnon based conspiracy stuff, and I'm going to get into a little later, is kind of part of our problem that we need to face. But just to finish on the democracy front, I wanted to talk about how we internally see ourselves in terms of our democracy. And so that, there's the objective outside evidence, but how do we see it ourselves in terms internally? So half of us believe the democracy is functioning poorly in our country at this point. And a quarter of us think it's performing well. But fortunately, 2/3 of us think it's the best form of government. But 4 in 10 of us don't believe our leaders are committed to the principles of democracy. And only 1 in 4 of us believe that government decisions reflect a majority of what the people want done. So there is, on the internal side of us, we're struggling with democracy and feeling like it's actually representative of who we are. And that's important too, because that leads to the distrust that I just mentioned, and the distrust of institutions and the ability to solve our problems, which is leading us towards this kind of devolution that I talked about. I'll stop there and see if you guys have any questions.
Yeah, there's an awful lot in what you've said, Mark, and I wonder if you step back, what surprises you most?
Roger and I and our team would like to thank you for your support and interest in the Deep Transformation podcast and the ongoing conversation in which we pursue the love of truth, the love of beauty, and the love of goodness, the eternal virtues and verities. If you've been touched and moved by this adventure and journey, we would ask you to press the like button and hit subscribe. It is deeply appreciated and enables us to grow and increase our ability to contribute. Thank you.
I'm shocked and surprised at how our mode of conversation has devolved, how the way that we treat each other has, in terms of this polarization, just the complete lack of trust to have a civil conversation to solve our problems. And so, like, just as an example, there was a great article in the Atlantic by Tom Nichols, and he was describing how many of the people in the Trump administration act like toddlers. And so, here's just some of the examples of that and how it leads to the corrosion of our democracy. So the White House press secretary is asked about who planned a meeting between the Americans and Russian presidents, and she answers, "Your mom did." And the Secretary of Defense cancels DEI and other policies by saying, "We're done with that shit." And the Vice President of the United States calls a person on social media a dipshit. And we have countless examples of Trump calling a reporter Miss Piggy, and
Sleepy Joe. He has an insult for everybody that comes his way. It's just on and on. We've never seen that before in our politics from the president.
So the dangers of kind of crass deflection, right? And allows this kind of immaturity, and in the process, it kind of numbs us to seeing how kind of corrupt, wrong, and gross it is. And so we kind of get numb to all of this, and so you have a president that's so crude and surrounds himself by sycophants that are equally as crude and probably not meritorious in terms of their ability to lead, to take on these roles, that they actually gain these roles not out of their ability, but out of their willingness to do and abide as the president wants, as you see in his cabinet meetings, which are basically, sessions where everybody talks about how great the president is.
Right.
Oh, God.
I think
it was like a Saddam Hussein cabinet meeting, glorious leader,
Rome, thanked him for preventing hurricanes on her watch, that he was the blessed one that was able to prevent hurricanes.
Really, that's impressive. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
If he can do that, that's actually pretty cool. Just
Mark,
to his credit.
Yeah.
Mark, I want to suggest there's a still larger perspective here, and that is you're talking about the tragedy of the decline in civil discourse and trust and what would be called social capital.
Yes.
And yes, that's clearly marked in the administration. but unfortunately, it's a symptom of in our larger culture, which is, and there's been this deterioration over the last decade or more, of which, there are many causes, but certainly social media with its algorithms which reward inflammatory comments and attacks and grievances and righteousness, etc. So, and polarization. Social media wasn't designed to create political divisiveness and even massacres, but as it has in other countries, but it does. And so there's this larger issue, which is being in some ways used rather skillfully by the current administration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly, I think there's a lot of factors, Roger. I think social media is one of them. I think I want to talk about our lack of achievement in education as another piece, our lack of civic understanding. And I want to talk about David Souter a little later, a late justice who really foretold about 12, 13 years ago some of the problems that we might be facing without a lack of civic understanding and taking on that responsibility. So I think it's there are cultural pieces, there are systemic pieces, there are economic pieces, and there is a spiritual deprivation, I think, in some ways, where the space to find deeper meaning is sometimes it's certainly for a large part of the population not having the opportunity to do that while they face economic hard times, while they face the polarization of cultural issues, and frankly, when I start to get down to the responsibility for a lot of this, we start to point towards the elites and towards cultural elites, and really paving the way for this Donald Trump reality that we face. I certainly don't think that's the whole part of the story, but it's a crucial piece that we need to deal with to kind of get at what our friend and mentor Ken Wilber talks about, the prime directive, which is to allow all stages of human consciousness to thrive and to be at healthy places to move forward. And unfortunately, some of our higher first stage places like postmodern, what some call the green meme, the mean green meme, has stifled that space. But I do want to get into that a little bit later. But yes, social media is a part of this, and it's a part of, I think, our lack of achievement as well that I want to talk about. But I want to finish a little bit more on, if this is okay with you guys, on this idea, this crassness, because there's another piece of it too. Mona Sharon wrote a piece called about whataboutism, and in that she talked about this logical fallacy called tu quoque, which means, and I may have pronounced that wrong, but you too. And so the you too fallacy is that if I talk about, Donald Trump and the salacious nature of his, misogyny and the gross way that he's dealt with women, the immediate answer Trump or his supporters come up with is, yeah, well, Bill Clinton, what about Bill Clinton?
Yeah.
And
They never answer a question. They go, yeah, what about that?
right. But this has become a part of how we operate and not really speak to each other, speak over each other. And so, if these improper pardons and how awful it is and illegal and the taking of this, yeah, well, what about Joe Biden and his son's computer? And what about Joe Biden pardoning his son? And on we go.
Again, the scapegoat issue. We talked about fascism. Anything that goes wrong, during this period that he's the president, it's Joe Biden's fault. I mean, ad nauseum. It just keeps over and over. Biden did it. We're great. And let me just add one thing, and I think it's a really important issue, is that the propaganda power of organizations like Fox News are amazingly powerful. And if you live in that bubble, that's what you watch. You're going to go away thinking that Donald Trump is really a great president and everything he's doing is absolutely right. And I went to stay with my father last couple of years of his life, and he would watch Fox News 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And I just saw how that just really made him angry and scared. And it's very, very powerful. And if that's the bubble you're in, you're never going to hear stuff like we're talking about, you know?
Right.
And how do we pop the damn bubble? How do we get discourse going? And, you know,
Yeah.
and go ahead, Mark.
Well, so, if you kind of do this deflection thing that they do, it breeds cynicism, and it kind of breeds the idea that to your point, that, well, if everybody is doing it, then it must not be so bad, right? So it's like the mafia boss who explains to his daughter why all the things they're doing isn't so bad, because it's a jungle out there and everybody's so awful and everybody's so gross that therefore it's okay what I do, and that justifies the actions. And that's really what happens, I think, probably on Fox a lot of the times, which justifies the behavior. And so that corrodes democracy, because it corrodes our belief in our institutions and our institutions' ability to solve problems and to work together to actually build for a better tomorrow, and to come together with different perspectives to do that. And so, the part of the answer to this is that, to answer eloquently and honestly, that's not answering the question. It's no different than when I was a trial attorney many moons ago, and someone would not answer the question. I learned the ability to say, excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. or Mrs. Stenographer, can you read back the question? And then ask the question again, and until we get an answer and or a process that allows us to have a dialectical discussion. But to kind of accept that this is okay, that this U2 logical fallacy is kind of allowed and okay, then we're kind of supporting this approach. And I think to be a part of the solution, to your point, there's a lot of other places where we can talk about as part of the solution, but at least part of the solution is to not to play the game, is to not be a part of that game. I think that there was a reporter who didn't play that game, who just kept asking the question. Let me find this example. There was a situation where the press secretary, where they were asked this question, and they did that like your mom, and they said, well, okay, I appreciate that, but where did this happen? And they just kept pressing the issue, and even though that they were laughed at on X and made fun of, and they just kept at it, and then they finally got the answer to the question. They just said, thank you very much, I appreciate you answering the question. And so they answered their snarky way of kind of dehumanizing us, dehumanizing people, by still honoring their humanity and asking for a higher level clarity of process. And we must demand that. We must not shirk our responsibility of moving away from that elevated way that a democracy demands to function, which is to talk to each other civilly, to have different perspectives, to have real debates, to have real processes, to listen to factual evidence, and then
Yes.
decisions that we, the people, are can hold them accountable for. And so, this to go back to Roger's point, that we kind of devolved so fast to kind of move in this direction of that logical fallacy, to dehumanize each other, to live in the space where, to Tom Nichols' point, that people are just acting like toddlers and we're all accepting it is okay, has shocked me, Roger.
Yeah, and I really appreciate what you're doing here, Mark, which is you're calling us, all of us, to I don't know, I can't quite come up with the right word, the higher, a better way of relating and to communicating with each other, which is based in human respect and a demand for a truth.
Yeah, and the utter deepest reality is the interconnection of all beings and the oneness of our experience. And so when we uh, when we when we do this, we're sowing the seeds of suffering, because the truth of the matter is this self that we're protecting, this or on the other side, this self that we're dehumanizing and we're making fun of and treating as an it, is a sentient being that we're connected to. And so, we must be a part of the solution of sowing the seeds of recognizing the humanity of our brothers and sisters on Fox, and all the listeners that believe in exactly what's being said, and being willing to enter into the arena of the dialectic, to have conversations, to listen, to understand fully where they're coming from. I mean, that's the directive of an integral being, is to really accept people for where they're at and understand where they're at. Doesn't mean we have to live from that space, but to honor that space, to see their inner dignity, is part of the solution. And I'm afraid that some parts of the cultural elite, some of our progressive brothers and sisters, are not at that stage or aren't willing to do that, and that's exacerbated some of the crisis that we're in today.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we developed a politics of divisiveness. I mean, that's where this gets all its juice and energy, is from dividing us, for just getting out and saying. And I remember during the COVID crisis, Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen Elizabeth, she did a speech to the country, and it's like we're all in this together. It was just a wonderful speech that was bringing us together. When we had that crisis, they used it to divide us again. There was just more fear and more hatred, and that's has so much power in that darkness. But what you're talking about is how do we begin to bring us back together again? And
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think it's I know we talk about the right and or box and divisive, but I mean, to some of Donald Trump's point on universities, that universities are quite divisive with the right, and there is real truth to the fact that it's very hard to be a conservative on a college campus, and there's just not a whole lot of space for those voices to be heard, and not marginalized. And so that is, I think how he's going about it is completely wrong, but bringing recognition to the fact that there is a dominant voice, uh, at universities that marginalizes the other side is there's some real truth there. And so
That's a really good point, Mark. I've seen the same thing. This kind of over hyper wokeism that just gets at some point gets ridiculous, and it has fueled the fire of the right, and deservedly so in cases, given him another issue just to again to divide us more. But how did we get there? How did we get to this, just one side in our academic systems and our great universities? What happened?
well, it's I think our uh, my mentor and our friend, I think Ken Wilber, many years ago, really nailed this, and I think he will be remembered for kind of seeing how I think the cultural elites kind of have kind of taken over the space. So I mean, I think I read a really great piece by David Brooks, uh, who it was a piece from 223, and it was like, maybe we're the bad guys, and he was talking about himself as being a part of the elite. And what he talked about was that, you know, um, we talked this great game of like, on the progressive side of everybody being on the same team and supporting the marginalized. But when it came to the Vietnam War, the elite got to stay home,
That's
and
right.
they got to go to college, and they got to stay out of that war. He mentioned, I think, when we just watched this in my constitutional law class, as we looked at busing, the busing crisis in Boston, which you know. Where the Judge Arthur Garrity, an Irishman, created a federal district court judge, saw the obvious segregation of the Boston school system and created a busing plan to deal with it. But guess who didn't have to be a part of that? Wellesley, Newton, and for those of you that don't know, those are wealthy communities that are outside of Boston. They didn't have to be a part of that process, and so um, you kind of see that there's this idea of this kind of meritocracy, but really it's only for the elite to kind of play in these circles. And so, there is a trajectory of, postmodern philosophy, which is kind of the apex of first tier thinking, and I'm using spiral dynamics as a model here, but universities are really overrun and dominated by postmodern philosophy, which believes in relativism, and really has an allergy to science and business, and so those sociological, those kind of more subjective ways of seeing the universe, which are absolutely important, uh, you know, become the dominant way. You can't work at a university without, you know, DEI as being a central part. You can't write without having him, her, his as part of your title. If not, and I'm not saying this is like absolutely for everybody. And I work at a place where we're a state school, and I think it's a little bit more relaxed, but there is those pressures, and there is that kind of orientation. Um, it's across the board. When you go to lunch, you kind of expect your colleagues to be voting Democrat and not Republican, and the only folks that do that are the people over in business, and those folks, to be honest,
Well, also in medical schools.
in medical school. Fair enough. I'm not So Roger, please talk because I don't have a medical school at my school, so I only know
Well,
my colleagues over
well,
there.
I'm kind of trying not to laugh when you say postmodernism's taken over. I don't think anyone in my medical school's even heard of
Yeah,
postmodernism. But I don't want to detract from an important theme here, and that is you're pointing out that there are issues on both sides,
yeah,
and and that that in some ways some of the I think Trump is a master of picking up intuitively some of the uh, discontents and cultural issues and mining them in with incredible skill. And so, and that's, so to acknowledge your point that there have been excesses on both sides, and part of a post-partisan position would be doing exactly what you're doing, acknowledging that and looking for how can we move forward as fellow humans. But
right.
I want to step back here and because clearly you've done a lot of work in preparing for our dialogue, and I think both of us really appreciate that. And you have a lot of ideas you want to cover. So let me give it to you and say, what would you next like to address here?
Yeah, well, I think John had, where do we go what what's the problem? And I think we've touched on it a little bit. Um, this kind of whataboutism, this crass way that I think is reflective of what I talked about in our last meeting, that kind of the red meme when in spiral dynamics, which is kind of it can be, in fact, I was reading Boomeritis again a little bit, and
Mhm.
there was a
Which is one
section,
of Ken Wilber's books.
yeah, and there was a section on um on the stage red, um and it said, we're seeing the terrible twos, rebellious youth, frontier mentality, feudal kingdoms, epic heroes, James Bond, villains, soldiers of fortune, wild rock stars, Attila the Hun. Um, and then the character in the book says, everybody knows somebody who's red meme, Kim said. They can be like so effing obvious. Sometimes they're really heroic, like a test pilot or a firefighter, but sometimes they're big, obnoxious, foul, loudmouth, just jerks. And I think we kind of can see that kind of mentality kind of taking place. And so that's different than some of the sturdy things that we kind of have worked so hard to earn, which is a more modern, that's below modernism, and some of the things I was talking about with postmodernism, where modernism really honors democratic principles, and then postmodernism wants to make sure that everybody is included, to make sure that those democratic principles are really honored for all beings. And so they make sure people with disabilities and transgender and more marginalized minority populations are part of it. So, we have this potential problem. And so what has kind of exacerbated the situation? And if I think if we see what is exacerbated it, then we can start to talk about how do we kind of solve this. So David Souter, I mentioned him earlier. He was a late justice on the Supreme Court. He's actually from the state of New Hampshire. And he gave a talk in 2012 at the University of New Hampshire Law School, and it was towards the end, and it's something that actually stuck with my students because I had them watch the presentation at the beginning of the semester. And it was the question was like the importance of civics in our educational system. And so I kind of want to just read what my notes on what he had to say, and how he kind of foretold the problem that we're facing. So this was Justice Souter. He said, I don't think there's any problem more significant today than the problem of pervasive civic ignorance of the Constitution of the United States and our structure of government. We know that 2/3 of the people of the United States don't know we have 3 branches of government, that a majority in a survey believed that the Supreme Court was a committee in Congress. And, you know, when I went to school, he said I had 2 civic courses. It gave us a greater sense of our responsibility, etc. And he went on to say that the reason why it's a most significant problem is because if people don't understand how government functions, then that civic ignorance leads them to not know how to solve the problems that we face. And so he quoted Jefferson that an ignorant people can never remain a free people. And then went on to quote Franklin, who was asked after the 1787 convention that created our Constitution, what kind of government will we be getting, he was asked. And he answered, a republic, if you can keep it. And he went on, Souter, to say that you can't keep it with ignorance. And so then this is the part that is kind of scary. He goes, I worry about the fact that if these problems aren't addressed, that people will not know who is responsible. And when the problems get bad enough, someone will come forward and say, give me total power and I will solve your problems. That's how the Roman Republic fell. Augustus became emperor because he promised to solve the problems that the Roman Senate weren't able to solve.
And the Roman Senate was also very corrupt. So, you know, that made room for somebody like Augustus. So government's important.
To that point, you know, there are people, you know, trying to make Congress less corrupt by passing laws that make it so that you can't, you know, engage in stock trading and things like that because you get insider knowledge. And that's been blocked by Democrats and Republicans, speaking of the corruption that you're speaking of. But anyway, I think Souter makes a really, really important point. It foretells, you know, someone coming in like a Donald Trump saying, I can solve all of your problems, put all of the power in me, and we can go forward. And the evidence, that was 2012. And the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation just did a study that revealed that the nation's civic knowledge is badly lagging. More than 70% of Americans fail a basic civic literacy quiz on topics like the 3 branches of government and the number of Supreme Court justices and the other basic functions of our democracy. 1/3 of us don't know that we have 3 branches of government. And so to go back to the spiral of our evolutionary process and that, you know, for modernism to function in a healthy way, to move to postmodernism, to move to metamodern, to integral stages of understanding, we have to have a strong foundation of a democratic foundation to move forward to post-democratic processes. And if folks don't understand their civic responsibility and are ignorant of that, then we're quite susceptible to authoritarian powers. And so, you know, this shouldn't be so surprising that a person like Donald Trump could come into power because we're so susceptible because of our lack of civic understanding and our and that's just not people's fault, but that's a part of our schools of what we choose to emphasize and what we don't choose to emphasize. I had this talk with my my society ethics and law class yesterday, our final day of classes together, and I've said, how much, focus on ethics, how much focus on civic understanding, your responsibility, were you given? And, the answer was just very little, very little. So there are other pieces to talk about, some of the problems with our lack of achievement in reading and math, and really problems with the public schools in terms of the internal realities of our students. Um, but I'll stop there and see if you want to react to what Suter had to say, and the kind of scary foretelling that he shared.
Well, clearly you're pointing to an important issue, which I had not appreciated and was unaware of. But yes, it makes total sense and this is not a new idea. I mean, even 2,500 years ago, Plato spoke of the necessity of an educated public or a thinking public. I think he actually was talking about a wise public, an even higher bar, in order for a society to function well. So this is a recurrent theme, and it raises all sorts of questions about, the optimal kind of education, and educating for not just to make a living, but to make a life.
Right.
So you're raising an important issue here, and there's probably no way we can point to all the factors that lead to a decline in democracy. But I think also of the fact that we're in, my goodness, wasn't in the 1980s that Toffler wrote about future shock? Well, my goodness, the rate of change now is so much faster.
Right.
And so there's this kind of dislocation and anomie and
Right.
people are going through. And one of the things we know about people under stress, they tend to regress psychologically and start the idea of someone who can provide simple answers to incredibly complex
Right.
problems. Actually, of course, overly simple answers is very appealing.
Absolutely. And I mean, to your point, the fact that we're training young brains and old brains now to with TikTok and Reels on our devices to get 3-minute answers to problems that
3 minutes, that's a long time, Mark.
I'm sorry, should 15 seconds, we're going to reduce it down to, 15 seconds. But, that speaks to that. And to your point about Plato, Plato, I think, and Socrates said that democracy was like the eighth worst out of nine or seventh out of eight worst forms of government because of the distrust of the people, and I've shared before that a democracy is what killed Socrates, and their ignorance of his wisdom and what he was providing society, and to the point where that scared Plato to go into exile for a long period of time. And Jefferson, I think, who read Plato early in life, tried to come up with what he thought would be a good answer, which was creating the University of Virginia, a public school, and the Army War College, and so
West
I
Point,
think
yeah.
all the different at West Point, and so I think all the different issues that you raise create kind of an integral vision of like don't try to find one reason for this, but that the change in economy, the even some of the stuff like some of our education achievements, like things like No Child Left Behind, some of our different approaches that focused on math and science and reading, has really de-emphasized our time of talking about civics. Um, and so we want to get those test scores into a certain, place. And so, there's that. And then also it's just when you talk about civics and you talk about these different things and you talk about our Constitution, you bring up that you got to bring up our original Constitution. A lot of my constitutional law classes spent on the pernicious nature of racism, the fact that we had slavery, the fact that women weren't a part of the process and even considered chattel for a significant part of our history. Those are real issues, and now in many ways they're considered divisive. And so and in a polarized society, and so people choose to shy away to talk about those things. And so I think there are so many factors, but I hope I hit on a couple that may lead to our civic ignorance and responsibilities. And I'll open to you guys to add more.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. Thank you. And one thing I've found when I'm having these discussions, I was talking to a beloved niece, and I was saying how really offended I was by how Donald Trump was threatening Canada and this great neighbor to the north that's always been with us, through so many things in the last 150 years. We tried to invade them 3 times, but beyond that, they've been great neighbors. And she lived in the Fox News bubble, and she had never heard about that. So I said, "Well, do you use ChatGPT?" She said, "Sure." I said, "Well, look it up. Did Donald Trump threaten Canada?" And she just goes, "Oh, wow. Yeah, okay." And so this thing, don't believe me, just fact check it. And perhaps, this atrocious level of our education in our country right now, perhaps AI will be a help, because you have contact with all the great minds basically that ever lived right there at your fingertips. And I've probably learned more from studying with ChatGPT in the last year than I had in grad school, because it's just so good. And you can ask questions to say to people, fact check, be curious, find out what the truth. And Ken Wilber talked about the post-truth era. Well, we kind of need to, now that we have these democratic tools where we can suss out things, and it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. Maybe that we're talking about times changing quickly. You can't have this conversation without talking about what AI is doing and how that's revolutionizing thing, and whether that's going to be our downfall or it's going to be positive. But that all the information is there if we want to look for it, and maybe to encourage people just to fact check, be curious, don't take my word for it, just ask. When Donald gives a speech, just fact check him. Bam, 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 it's done.
Yeah, on the Chat GPT, as a professor of college students, I'm looking forward uh, to finding out ways of utilizing it in the positive way that you have. My my fear and some evidence is that the assignments that are given are just punched into Chat GPT, and it's answered for them, and you can kind of see those products, which has actually led me to move back to taking tests in person and moving away from that, so that I can ensure that my students are actually learning, as opposed to sometimes I'll walk around campus and I'll hear not necessarily someone from my class, but that someone just punched it into Chat GPT and we're given the answers. And so that curiosity that you have utilized it for, which is, I think, something that you had to go through a growth process of how to obtain knowledge on your own before you knew how to utilize a tool to even expand your knowledge beyond where you already were, in a really beautiful way that you've described, and in a way that you've used to enhance our conversation today.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I don't know how we're going to do that. I believe we're going to have to. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she plays basketball, and I'm the driver of the car for that. And so we go a lot of places. And we've talked about, the use of Chat GPT, and she's far more tech savvy than I am, but she has the same fears that I have about how students just kind of use it to gain answers and not gain the requisite foundational skill sets that are necessary to help heal the world and problem solve without the tool. You know,
Yeah,
Mark,
this,
go ahead, Roger.
yeah, and this is a huge topic, but I'm inclined to try to bring us back to the theme here, because you've done so much, you have so many ideas and thoughts, and clearly some things you'd like to bring up here. So I'd just like to invite you to
Yeah.
move to whatever topics you think we should cover here.
I'd like to make one point before we move to the AI thing. The other couple of weeks ago, I typed in, can you create me a dissertation on human consciousness and the collapse of the wave function? Chadwick, sure. And immediately, in like 3 seconds, did this incredible outline for a dissertation. And if I'd have gone, well, continue, it would have just done it. And in a few seconds, done the whole dissertation. I mean, good God, good Lord. And I learned a lot about consciousness and the collapse of the wave function, just reading the outline. But it wasn't like, no, I can't do that. It's like, of course I can do that. There you are.
Right. Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, it's something that we must grapple with, tackle, deal with, and figure out a way that will help support the directive of growth to goodness and do the best we can to make that reality. I don't have any answers on that, and I'm struggling as a college professor trying to ensure that my students grow and become critical thinkers with a heart and know that this is there and have seen some of the potential damage of short circuiting that process. But there's a way to do it, and I'm not the person yet to show how. And I bow to my colleagues that are doing it and trying to figure it out and attempting, because it's inevitable that we're going to have to use and figure it out. So my wife started using it. So I will stop there. Thank you, John, for that wisdom. The I guess another area of that, so this theme here is this, like, what's leading to this devolution towards kind of the red meme authoritarian pieces. And I've talked about our coarse discourse. We've talked about our lack of civic understanding, and what that leads to, not understanding how democracy works and the institutions and holding people accountable and being a part of the process. But in addition to that, our achievement scores in terms of schooling has dropped precipitously since 2013. So last winter, the federal government released the results of its semi-annual reading and math tests for 4th and 8th graders. And in nearly every category, the scores had plunged to levels unseen in decades. Reading tests, 40% of 4th graders and 1/3 of 8th graders performed below basic lowest threshold functioning. A separate assessment of 12th graders conducted this past spring yielded similar results. 24% of the students couldn't understand the word decipher at the 12th grade level. And so, we could look at all the different issues that are the cause of that. And there are a lot that we could speculate. And certainly the articles I've read have talked about that. But that's just a reality that we're dealing with. And then on the internal side of the student, so that's that their cognitive understanding of things, their emotional abilities are hurting. One article by Jia Lin Yang in the New York Times was called "Our Children Are Unwell," and so for example, 1 million more children were diagnosed with ADHD in 2022 than in 2016. Our autism diagnoses through the roof. And of course, I'm sure Roger has some insight here that there could be overdiagnoses, there could be a changing of definitions. But I just know as a college professor that I see more folks with anxiety who identify with anxiety, depression, and some kind of mental illness than I have ever seen before. And I just wonder, we think like about what's happening, we talk about the schools in terms of the achievement, but what's happening at the school level in terms of their ability to kind of foster kids with their mental health in a positive way. I just wonder about questions along those lines about, what are we doing as a society to meet people where they're at in terms of their development on the inside and the outside to foster an environment where they grow to higher stages of consciousness, which ought to be our birthright as citizens. And so, I think about the internal reality of our students and their not being well across the board. I think of the lack of achievement. Think about the lack of civic understanding across the board, including adults. And then it starts to make a little bit of sense why lower stages that are more black and white, that are more simplistic, as one of you mentioned, that simplify answers, why that world might be more attractive than a democratic world that requires complexity, requires conversation, requires the ability to see the intrinsic worth of the person across from you, to have a conversation with, to collectively decide that we will vote together and honor the winner of the election, and not deny it, but honor the processes because we believe in those processes. I wonder if all those different pieces have contributed to our willingness to be more susceptible to authoritarianism. And I'll stop.
Well, yeah. Well, you're pointing to the enormous complexity of the issues, Mark, and I appreciate your bringing in the fact that this is a culture that the slide towards authoritarianism we're seeing is happening within a culture and society which in many ways is not adequately healthy, mature in the way that would be really valuable, if not essential, for a fully functioning democracy. And you're pointing to really challenging and difficult issues. The fact that we have this mental health crisis in our children, and the fact is we're running a huge civilization-wide uncontrolled experiment in which kids are now living under artificial light or artificial rhythms, in nature deprived, with mediated lives, much of their lives coming through media and screens rather than direct relationship, in which we are living in a soup of chemicals, such that, as one researcher said, it's impossible to have a normal brain any longer. That's a literal quote from an award-winning environmental scientist. I mean, there are so many factors which we haven't begun to parse out, but there are a lot of issues, and I appreciate the fact that you're pointing to the range of issues, all the way from the political and the balance of powers down to child rearing and the environments and cultures within which our kids are growing up. And it's a complex issue.
Oh, Roger, it's
Can I
just
add?
beautifully said. Yeah.
I want to add a positive note. Uh, 2 days ago, we did a tour. We live in this, my wife's family, this big historic home. So we did a tour with eighth graders. They came in and they were asking amazing questions. And they were just, it was so inspiring to be in touch with that kind of thing. And when I was leaving, this young black uh, eighth grader came up to me and said, "Did your family fight for the Confederacy?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Yeah, they sure did." Said, "But when I was a kid, I started studying the Civil War. Almost immediately, I recognized we fought on the wrong side."
Mhm.
And she just went, "Okay." And it was just this moment of connection. And for those of us who've been blessed with education, if we can reach out and mentor and inspire in young people a love for the truth,
Yeah.
because it's out there, and it's very accessible. It's democratized, with this new technology we have. So reach out, touch young people, listen to them, tell them things like fact check, and let them, they can do it in the moment and they start saying, hey, this is different. And I mean, I'm just saying that's something inspired me. And these kids are amazing. They were from a private school, but they were just young and curious and sharp, and it was very racially mixed, and they were there together, and it was very cool. So
Yeah.
little
No, that's
little
beautiful. That's beautiful. I, I think that your words about, seeking truth, that that kind of being a foundation of our being, and that really that kind of truth is hard earned in the sense that that is a very modern notion that we evaluate, we fact check, we use the scientific process of coming up with ideas, hypothesizing, and then we check the evidence and we go through that evidentiary process of deciding to help us understand, at least in the relative world, what is an objective truth. And so, that having that as a habituated part of our reality through our educational system is critical and important. And it sounded like that kid was someone who's done the fact checking and was fact checking you to see if in fact uh, you were on the money. And fortunately, John, you were. Of course you were, but
course.
because of your values. But that's part of the solution, and what's at stake in terms of where we need to go and why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mark, one of the things I appreciate about what you're saying is that you're really pointing to um, the importance of underlying values, and for those of us who want to play some role, whatever humble role it can be, you're pointing to the fact that it really has to be done with integrity and respect for humans. And I think what I'm hearing is that you're you're offering a vision from grounded in your own deep contemplative spiritual practice. And you're reminding me of the idea that that although we usually think of spiritual practitioners along the pacifist side, there is the ideal in several traditions of the warrior saint. And for
Yeah,
example, Sikhs talk about the Sant Sapali, the translated as saint warrior, or the Shaolin monks in Buddhism, or in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the central texts of Hinduism. There's the idea one fights, but one does it as one's duty, not out of any vengeance or egotistical
right.
means. And so it feels like in some way you're calling us to be contemplative warriors for the good in whatever ways we can. Uh, and that seems like a very noble calling.
Yeah, that's it. We uh we have to take up the fight for greater awareness, which recognizes the good, the true, and the beautiful, and the oneness of the absolute, the suchness of what is. And because when you feel that, when you see that, when you understand that, there is, utter compassion flows from our being for all sentient beings. And so suddenly this so-called enemy, which is, part of, many Buddhist practices, certainly some that I practice, where you start to see the fact that your enemy was is really your friend, and really nothing different than that. And what is in the Tao, there's a great passage, I think Tao passage 27, which I keep on my desk, the Tao, but it says it so well towards the end. The master is available to all people and doesn't reject anyone. He's ready to use all situations and doesn't waste anything. This is called embodying the light. What is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? If you don't understand this, you will get lost. However intelligent you are, it is the great secret.
Beautiful.
Can I share just one little thing? I'm throwing out all
Yeah.
these anecdotes, but it's been a very rich week. And a friend of a person that has worked with our family, for wife's family, for a long, long time. Her neighbor that lived in a mobile home, and he was burning leaves, and the leaves got into her yard and caused severe, well, not severe, but pretty substantial fire damage. So the guy was culpable. We had the fire chief's report on it, and I went over there. Everybody's kind of scared of this guy. He's really grumpy. He has a Confederate flag out in front of his house, and I went and talked to him, and we must have talked for a half hour. And guy lives on Social Security and disability. He doesn't have insurance for his truck. He doesn't have insurance for his mobile home.
Mm.
And my heart just broke open. And I just listened a lot. And in Louisiana, we have the more poor people. It's the second worst state for poverty in the nation. I think Alabama's worth. And just hanging out with this old white dude who was just marginally living. And it just it was so just touched me deeply in my heart and my soul, and makes me want to just be a better person and reach out. And I said, sir, I'm not going to do anything to hurt you. He had no money to help repair this house. I said, we'll take care of it, and God bless you. So it was, I almost called Roger right after, because it was so moving to me. And those people are out there, and we live in such, the three of us, in such privileged circumstances. We've had education, we've had families, we have housing, we have electricity, we have enough food. And there's a lot of people in our country don't have that. And somehow we have not figured out how to help our people very well, And I think it has to be in a 4-quadrant way. It has to be the inner, the body, the outer, the cultural, just the physical logistics of how we move around in the world. And 1-quadrant answers aren't going to do it. But I think perhaps a broken heart, an open heart, is a really powerful place to start from. And we can work on it from there.
Yeah, that's a
Beautiful.
beautiful story. That's a beautiful story. And thank you for being so kind and compassionate to him, and loving
Yeah.
and showing him the fact that you see him as your brother. And no matter what his politics and position is. And that's really, really part of the answers to what we've been talking about today. And, is that, I mentioned it earlier, is this kind of, Wilbur talks about the prime directive. and and this prime directive is something that asks us to honor and appreciate everyone at their own unique stage in life, uh, and to allow them and afford them the space and the dignity to be heard and understood and appreciated. As we know from an integral perspective, that because everybody has a partial piece of the truth. And am I, the challenge for us is, am I curious enough to inquire and find that space to understand your partial piece of the story that will enrich my life, help me understand, and help us see, how we all are in this together. And so we, as a species, must create greater space uh, for understanding, folks at different lots of life, at different stages of the process, and honor that. That's I consider it an incredible blessing to teach at a state university with many students whose parents, 40% at least, didn't go to college, and this is their first generation of being a part of it, and to kind of be a midwife of their kind of moving to different stages of understanding, but also helping me understand their center of gravity and how I can be of greater service to them, from an objective perspective, and also providing meditative opportunities for growth to greater understanding of reality. And so, that prime directive, I think, is the kind of ultimate answer to this kind of regression towards authoritarianism, is to try to understand, and my father, now I have to say, my late father, Michael Fischler, um, he had a saying. It was a French saying that he repeated as a mantra many times, to the point ad nauseum for some of us that spent a lot of time with him. But he would say, "To comprendre, c'est to pardonner," and to understand is to forgive. And that, that was there's just so much wisdom there. And that is our responsibility, and that is our duty as with citizens with the awareness, John, and the privilege, as you described, to help support our fellow sentient beings on the path.
Yeah, and there's an underlying point in what both of you are speaking to, which we haven't addressed, but clearly one of the factors which is facilitating the slide towards authoritarianism, not only here, but in other parts of the world too, is the extraordinary economic inequality, which is growing and is one of the great tragedies of our time. I'm sure we can all cite information, but the fact that 20 billionaires have as much wealth as half of the world's population is morally disgusting, and it's getting worse, unfortunately. So you're pointing. So there's both this macro level of the billionaires and the world wealth distribution, and then there's the micro story that you just gave us, John, of how this plays out, personal tragedy. Let's see, we're probably coming towards the end here, but is
Sure.
there, I have a couple of, just two conclusion questions, but is there anything you want to bring up beforehand, Mark?
Someone mentioned at the beginning the Supreme Court, and um, that's we're at an interesting time. I think, John, you mentioned something about them, and I think that there's something to be said that the court is now dominated, I think, by folks that have are what call themselves originalists, and which is kind of this perspective that we honor the traditions and the approaches that our founding fathers and the traditions of our country have kind of followed, which leads to certain kinds of results pretty consistently, and that they have moved towards more, I think they say, more power in the executive branch of government. And so we've seen a series of cases where on their emergency docket, they've kind of allowed Trump to do a lot of the things that he's wanted to do. And, they haven't, an emergency docket means that they're not fully addressing the issue yet, but it certainly has allowed him to have a greater level of authority. And this court is moving away from taking race into account in anything. And so we saw that where they moved away from using race with affirmative action. And there's a case out of Louisiana, John, Louisiana versus Calais,
LA, I think so.
which is at the Supreme Court right now, where uh, they're looking at the Voting Rights Act and Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which does the Voting Rights Act kind of allows the federal authorities to kind of oversee your state if your state has had a history of racial problems. And so Section 2 talks about race specifically. And so in this case in Louisiana, the census came out in 2020, and they recognized that 1/3 of the state is African American, except only 1/6 of the congressional districts are African American. And so they NAACP sued, and now the case is at the court, and the court is really kind of grappling with this question of should we ever take race into account, and the conservative justices are saying probably not. And I see merit with that as we move to a higher state of consciousness that recognizes. We all listened to Gregory Thomas talk about at a conference we were at a few years ago, talking about that perspective. But also I'm sitting with my constitutional law students and looking at the history and the pernicious nature of how race has been used. And so here it is trying to at least use it for a positive. So the court is grappling with that very issue. And so, if they do rule in favor of the state of Louisiana, which didn't want to create a further Black-oriented district, then you're going to see that political gerrymandering at another level in at least southern states that have been a part of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2. So that's just something to throw out there to think about. I don't have any good answers, but I think it's something that our listeners who have an orientation towards what our Supreme Court might be doing or want to contemplate that ought to consider.
Yeah, Mark, and what a time to be teaching constitutional law.
Yeah.
It ain't historical, it's present. The issue's right. It must be amazing.
Yeah, I haven't been able to teach it for a few years, and it was the greatest thrill in a long time to be able to grapple with these civil liberty issues. And to your point, having them right before our eyes, where we can just take a current case and then look at the reasoning of the past to see where we think they're going to come down and why. And so it's been an honor. But we're living in interesting times for sure. And we thought some of these cases were settled, but they're not.
And Mark, as we come to a close and also look towards the future, what are some things that, this has been somewhat of a dour dialogue because we've been looking at a very serious issue, that is the slide, authoritarian slide, and this is a huge issue, but
Yeah.
what are some of the things that give you hope?
Yeah. A lot, like I said, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she and her friends are take the issues seriously. They're looking at the world. They see uh the poverty that you describe, and they want to get after it. They want to make a difference. I teach criminal justice students, and the very nature of being a criminal justice student, at its most basic, is that you want to help, that you want to do some good, that you want to make the world a better place in some way. And our numbers haven't dropped in that way. And so I find that exciting. I find it positive. I think our democracy is, like I said at the beginning, our states are great laboratories of where we're going and what we're doing, and they are thriving in that way of grappling with the issues of our times, and trying to coming up with different answers as to where we ought to go. And that's beautiful, because those are different perspectives. What happens in New York and California is different than the laboratory of Texas. And just as an example, talking about the achievement scores, well, guess where reading is actually doing pretty well in the fourth grade and the eighth grade? Louisiana and Alabama, and some other southern states. Mississippi, they talked about the Mississippi Miracle, and not doing so well in some of the more democratic oriented states, because there's a level of accountability, there's this special tutoring, and there's this level of accountability where they're saying, like, you don't get to go to the third or fourth grade unless you're able to perform at this level. And so that's great. And a lot of those states don't spend a whole heck of a lot of money on on not just higher education, but on education in general. And so that's exciting to see, that maybe, some of these formulaic approaches of spending all this money in this way isn't necessarily, the only answer to the problem. Maybe, there are different ways. Even the idea of classrooms, I read something great about that. We had this idea you had to have really small classrooms for kids to thrive, and you can have up to 27 kids in a classroom and do okay. And I think about the diversity of perspectives that come into play, at that level, that allows us to kind of thrive in a different way. So, I see that. I see there are politicians that come across the aisle that are working together still on different issues. That's positive. And the fact that we are, the fact that we are a global village, as much as some folks like to say that we're not, the evidence points more and more in that direction, that what happens in Singapore impacts what happens here. That interconnection is real. And as the United States takes a step back, well, you see other countries that are rising to the occasion to work with Ukraine that maybe hadn't before. And so you're seeing a level of solidarity across Europe that maybe hadn't been there before. And so, those things, give me some hope that we can do this. And just the fact that on a spiritual level there is that oneness, and there is humans that are practicing, like you both, and Heidi, who's helping this broadcast, and so many beings around the world that are that live and breathe that want to make it better for all beings. And that I would imagine as the numbers grow and the number of beings in the world, well, that the number of contemplatives are growing as well, and that's a good thing.
May it be so. Well, in one perspective, what you're saying is we both as a country and as a species are in a race between consciousness and catastrophe. And
Yes.
yeah, let's pray that that we can each make our little contribution and help move us in an optimal direction.
Yes.
Mark, really appreciate both the scope of your knowledge and the depth of your wisdom and the goodness of your heart. That
Yeah, it's always great connecting, Mark. Really appreciate it.
you bring a beautiful combination to bear on some of the great issues of our time, and you also bring a legal expertise that is really deeply needed. And so, yeah, it's really a gift. Thank you so much for what you're doing and for the contribution you've made to our community.
Thank you, Roger and John. It's an honor and it's a privilege, and I love what you both do and what you bring, and I'm a big fan of both of you and your show, and so to be a guest on it is the highest honor. As I look at my wife and I'm like, I can't believe I'm on this show with people I have adored, and certainly I can remember Roger. Being at a workshop in the early 2000s, that you the early integral days, and calling to my then girlfriend saying, I am with Roger Walsh. And and John, your work I listen to every day actually. So you guys are incredible beings, and so thank you, and I'm honored and humbled to with your
Well,
words.
thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah,
Yeah,
God bless, Mark.
yeah.